What in the world do you write your financial newsletter about? It's a question that comes up a lot, and it's one of the hurdles that prevents financial professionals from sending more emails. Or they're not emailing as often as they like, and not emailing with the confidence they like when they do get one out. Today we're going to talk about 3 ideas that you may not have thought about that hopefully will be helpful for you. First, let me say, we're not necessarily talking about newsletters in the traditional sense. Because although there's a place for corporate sounding, third person newsletters, I suppose, you don't have to send that kind of newsletter. Your emails can they can sound personal. They can be personal. And even if you have a multi-person firm, you don't have to sound like a big faceless organization. Your emails can have a voice, and they can be sent from the face of the firm, whoever that might be. So feel confident in knowing you don't have to sound like the big institutions. You don't have to sound like anybody but who you are. And what you really want to do is sound like the person who your audience wants to hear from. Because let's face it, people like people. People want to connect with people. And a lot of times newsletters are boring. They're just boring. So I encourage you to be free. Now, you may have already known this and may already be doing it, but just in case, I thought I would mention that. So let me say one other thing. Not only we're not talking about newsletters in the traditional sense. I want to encourage you to avoid a couple of topics that I think are very commonly used. Number 1, sending out market updates. In most cases, that's not super helpful, because your readers can find the exact same information on CNBC or on MarketWatch, and they may move faster. So it's hard to compete in that space. You don't necessarily want to do that. And it's hard to be as comprehensive and in depth as a Robinhood Snacks style newsletter would be. So that information is out there everywhere. You want to have something that's unique to you. So we'll talk about market updates in a little more in a second, but don't use that as the foundation for what your newsletter should be. I encourage you not to make that the main thing, because it's everywhere. Secondly, you generally, I think, want to avoid cutesy topics. Particularly, what I have in mind is, it's National Cookie Day. Unless cookies is part of your brand, I said cookies is. Unless cookies are part of your brand, and you always send cookies to your clients every time you meet with them, I would avoid that. You're better than that, aren't you? So what should you write about? What are some good topics? Here's the 3 ideas I want to share with you today. Number 1, even before I do that, let me say, rather than forcing our ideas on the marketplace, or falling in love with our own concepts, or doing what everyone else is doing, you want to figure out and understand deeply who your readers are. Where are they at in life? What are they thinking about? What do they aspire to? I say it like this: their pains and their problems, their fears and their frustrations, their dreams and their desires. What are those things? And then use that information. I would write it all down. Use that information as a starting point for what topics you're going to pick and how you're going to approach them before you do anything else. Now, having said that, the first idea is we're going to talk about market updates, but from a different angle. You want to go behind the headlines. Everyone's talking about the S&P moved, it went up 12% last month. Boring. What's the story behind the story? What aspects of the story are not being covered? What aspects of the story are not readily understood or not really properly understood? What is it that your reader needs to understand to get the most out of what's happening in the market? Now, of course, it depends on how often your readers are paying attention to the market. For long-term investors, it's less important than day traders, of course. But that's why you need to understand who your readers are. So let's get into the story behind the story. If you have a contrarian opinion, make sure you're sharing that. Your unique perspective is what makes you special, what's going to draw people to you and make them want to listen. And it sets you apart from everyone else. Everyone's talking about the same thing, or 90% of people are talking about the same thing, either from the positive or the negative. They're saying interest rates coming down is good, or interest rates coming down is bad. But you can talk about something, interest rates coming down isn't actually an issue. Whatever your third perspective is. If you have a contrarian opinion, share that on the regular, because that's important and that's going to make you stand out. The second thing, going behind the headlines and sharing the hidden truth, is idea number one. Idea number two is go and make a list about, or a list of, the myths that your readers, commonly held or beliefs that are incorrect, myths that your readers may believe, and common mistakes that your readers may be making that are hurting them, and talk about those things. I think this is difficult for some people. Some financial advisors want everything to be really just educational from a positive perspective. And there's nothing wrong with that. Education is important, and being positive is good. You want to empower people, empower your readers to take action to improve their lives and to reach their goals. But if they're believing myths, it may be more effective, and it often is more effective, rather than saying how to max out your IRA in 2025. You could say 3 silly settings that could sabotage your IRA in 2025. And someone your subject line says how to max out your IRA in 2025, they think they know that. They think, yeah, I'm making the max contribution. I'm cool. But if you say there's 3 mistakes that are sabotaging your contribution, they don't know what that might be. And it causes them to step back and say, I wonder if I'm doing anything wrong that's preventing me from getting the maximum benefit from my IRA. So pointing out mistakes, pointing out myths is important. It is helpful because you want your readers to know the truth. You want them to act in a way that gives them the best outcomes. And sometimes we got to point out the negative for them to understand that. Now, again, there's nothing wrong with putting it in the positive. I would just create a mix, alternate good and bad, maybe not one for one, but have a mixture of positive and negative angles that all end up in the positive place at the end. But in the beginning, talk about negative things sometimes, because people need to see that. Plus, we respond to danger. We respond to fear as human beings to protect ourselves, protect our assets, protect our loved ones. We make decisions based on those feelings often. So feel free to use that, or feel emboldened to use that. There's nothing wrong with it. It's actually very helpful. All right. The third idea is sharing your stories. I know, again, it feels many times in finance, we just want to educate. And so even if we share stories, we're kind of lightweight with it, or very perfunctory. There's certain lines we won't go outside of. We just want to talk about the same kinds of stories that prove a point. But what point are you trying to prove? There's several points you should be trying to prove. And so there's kind of 3 angles I want to come at within this idea. The first kind of stories that you should share are share stories that demonstrate your values as a person or as a firm, and demonstrate your worldview, your perspective, your investment thesis or approach, but in the form of a story. So rather than saying we believe in integrity, which should go without saying, right? But rather than just saying it, share a story that shows it. Share a scenario to the extent, the details that you can share, of decisions that you made that prove and paint that picture of we believe in authority. And you may not even have to say that. I'm going to share a story with you, and it needs to be relevant to them. But in the process of this story unfolding, you show them, oh, these people have integrity. This firm, acts in a way that's, it puts the other puts truth and puts the right behavior at the forefront versus profit or versus whatever, right? And so you can share your values in, like here's our list of values, but it's much more powerful to put it in a story or in various stories over time. And the more stories you share over time, the more people get to know you and they understand this person is like me. This firm is my kind of firm. They believe in what I believe in. They see things the way I see them. And that kind of connection goes beyond what you can find on Barron's or on MarketWatch. It's the connection that matters. And as time goes by, people will feel more and more connected to you, more and more willing and wanting to work with you. And then, of course, for people who are already working with you, it forms deeper and deeper loyalty and keeps people, keeps top of mind for them to share your information, your ideas with other people, their friends and families who also need your help. So that's the first kind of story. The second kind of story is highlighting victories and failures. Now, again, I think to some extent financial professionals do this, but I think oftentimes you're nervous to get into the nitty gritty. You want to kind of say, I made that mistake, but I came out, on the other side better for it. I encourage you, dig into the details, share the emotions, share the real play by play, not necessarily super granular because, it still needs to move fast enough to keep people interested, but feel free to share all the pains and the frustrations and the unique parts of the story that show who you are and what you're made of. And people will then say, as long as, again, you're coming from the perspective of, I want my readers to know that I get them. And when they read these stories, they're going to say, he understands me. She has been where I've been. This is the kind of person who I can trust. This is the kind of person who can get me where I'm going. And you won't get that with just information. And you won't get that with kind of superficial stories either. Getting into the authentic, real, raw truth. You're not going to do it every day, but as you send out emails like that over time, or whatever form you're communicating with your audience, these things bond you with people, and they like you. They believe that you understand them, and they want to work with you. So that's number 2 in this idea. And then number 3 is toot your own horn a little bit. Maybe a little more than you're used to doing. This is tough for many financial professionals because you don't want to seem braggadocious and you don't want to seem crass. But it's important for people to understand that you are to be respected. You, even to some extent, are to be admired. People want to admire someone. People are looking for leaders. And you would do well to establish yourself as a leader, not just through good information and not even just through stories. I mean, those things are creating a perspective of you as a leader, but also showcasing that you already are a leader. People are already, you're already in demand. Your services are in demand. Your expertise is sought after. So share stories about opportunities that you've had that really paint you, shine the spotlight on your status and on your authority. If you've got, to the extent that you can share it, you've got clients that you've worked with currently or in the past. Again, to the extent that you can share that, brag about it, talk about it, like in a respectful way, but just talking about stages you've been on, podcasts that they've requested you to come speak on, certifications that you got, tell stories about graduating from Harvard, those things. It's not bragging if you do it gracefully, but sharing those stories helps paint the picture of you as you really are, which is a person who's trustworthy, who's an expert, who's sought after, and people gravitate towards that. People will want to give their business to people who other important people, influential people give their business to and work with. And there's no shame in leveraging your status to attract people to yourself and to nudge people into doing business with you because you are looking out for their best interests. Working with you is the best thing that they can do with their time and their money and their effort. And so pull out all the stops and let them know you're a person that's worthy of respect. So those are the 3 ideas: going behind the headlines, talking about myths and mistakes, and then sharing your stories as a person, as a firm. I also consider sharing historical stories that are just interesting and maybe people haven't heard the full truth about, or they haven't heard about it at all, but they're about people who are interesting, or facts that are intriguing or relevant to today. Share those stories. So those are the 3 ideas. I'd love to hear in the comments which one you're going to use first, or which ones you're already using. So I hope this has been helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.